Hello, World History 2 students. Um, this is Mr. Everton, and this is video 5.3, all about England and the Enlightenment and challenges to absolute monarchy. So our question for today, and I'm recording this the very day that you're about to do it. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. In an hour, I'll have students in my room doing these vid notes. It's very exciting. How did the Enlightenment change England? That is our question. And to understand that question, we got to back up a little bit. We're going to address how did Charles challenge Parliament, but first, where did Parliament come from and what is it? So going back to the 1200s, England had a tradition of limiting the power of its monarch, of its king. Here you can see a painting of King John I signing Magna Carta. Magna Carta means Great Charter in Latin. And there are many different copies of it left. This is one of them. I mean, many. By many, I mean something like 10. But this is what it looks like. And it's a list of rights that the king signed, granting these rights to the nobles of England, saying that the king could not get in the way of these rights. Things like trial by jury. If you are accused of a crime, then a jury of your peers will try you. Due process, which means they're not going to lock you up and not give you a speedy trial. They're not going to lock you up and not give a reason why. Limits on taxation. The king can't just tax people whenever he wants to. He has to have a good reason and he has to have approval from Parliament. Magna Carta didn't outright create Parliament, but it led to the evolution of Parliament. It sort of created Parliament, and then Parliament evolved over time. What's Parliament? If in the United States we have a Congress that writes our laws and that's our legislature, Parliament is the national legislature for Great Britain, at this time England. Parliament is it's made up of representatives of the people. People vote for their representatives, and then those people all come to a centralized location, in this case, London, where they vote and make laws. And Parliament is a powerful check on the power of the King of England. Because England had a parliament, the king had less power than, say, Louis XIV of France or Peter the Great of Russia, because Parliament had power too. So this becomes a problem because after Elizabeth I dies, the second king after her, his name was Charles I. Charles I wanted to be an absolute monarch. He believed he was an absolute monarch. He thought that he had the divine right of kings, which means anything he says is the law and nothing he does is against the law. And he didn't like Parliament because they were, they took away some of his power. So he dissolved Parliament for 11 years, and Parliament didn't meet for 11 whole years, and England became more of an absolute monarchy. But then, because of a series of conflicts, Charles needed money in order to pay for an army. And so he called Parliament back into session, and they immediately began to do things he didn't like. And this led to a war. This led to conflict between Charles I and Parliament. Charles tried to shut down Parliament again. Parliament wouldn't have it. And so England divided into two groups, the Roundheads and the Cavaliers. The Roundheads were called that because they cut their hair really short. The Cavaliers had really long hair. Cavaliers is where UVA's football team and basketball team get their name from. The UVA Cavaliers, they're named after this. So Roundheads supported Parliament. They were sometimes called the Parliamentarians. And Cavaliers supported the king. They were called Royalists. So we're going to cut to the chase. This was, a period of 10 to 15 years of fighting between these two groups. And the Roundheads won. They won because they were led by this guy, Oliver Cromwell. And Oliver Cromwell was a good military leader, and he innovated with the army and made them stronger, and they won. And then they put Charles I, the King of England, on trial for not having the best interests of England at heart. I mean, that wasn't the charge, but that's basically what it was. And they found him guilty, and they cut his head off. So this is a huge challenge to absolute monarchy, right? This King of England says that he's an absolute monarch, tries to dissolve Parliament, and he ends up getting his head cut off, which scared the crap out of all the other kings and queens in Europe. Oliver Cromwell makes himself the ruler of England, but he doesn't call himself king. He calls himself the Lord Protector. And he basically functions as a dictator. I mean, he is a dictator for about another 10 years. Oliver Cromwell kind of does whatever he wants. He weakens Parliament even further. Parliament shrinks and gets much, much smaller. And Oliver Cromwell starts putting all these really strict religious rules in place. He's very, very religious. He's very conservative form of Protestant, and he believes that like dancing should be against the rules. He doesn't like Christmas. He thinks Christmas is sinful. So he starts putting all like no theater, like all these things that people like. He starts banning them and making it so that people can't do those things. So he's very unpopular, but he's also powerful enough that he's able to like stay in charge for about 10 years. Well, eventually he dies. He dies of natural causes. And when he dies, the people of England are like, you know what I miss? Having a king. And so they brought back Charles I's family. They brought back his son James. They brought back his son Charles II and made him the king. And then after Charles II died, his brother James II became king. This is called the Restoration because they're restoring the monarchy. They're bringing the monarchy back. They brought the monarchy back because Oliver Cromwell was so unpopular with his outlawing dancing and Christmas. Like if you want a recipe for being unpopular, outlaw dancing and Christmas. People like those things. Shortly later, a little later, and I'm skipping some things for the sake of simplicity, but the Parliament passed an act of Parliament called the Bill of Rights, in which, and this was before the American Bill of Rights, right? Like this is the first Bill of Rights. This is an act of Parliament that put into law checks against the king and made sure that Parliament would never be treated the way it had been treated. The way that Charles I treated Parliament, where he dissolved them and wouldn't let them meet, made sure that would never happen again. You can see here on this little graphic that is not the real English Bill of Rights, but you can do not tax the people of England without the agreement of Parliament. Do not have your own permanent army. Do not overrule the laws that are passed in Parliament. Allow Parliament to meet at least once every year. Allow free and fair elections, etc. And so this codifies, that means puts into law, that England is going to have a limited monarchy, that the King of England will have limited power, and that the king or queen will have to share power with the Parliament, with the legislature of England. And this is really important for many, many reasons, but a lot of Americans like to point to this as this was like where a lot of American government came from. The idea that we would have a Congress and a president and a judiciary and they would all have to share power. Like this is the model for that. This is the model for the American Bill of Rights. So not only does this challenge absolute monarchy, not only is this an example of Enlightenment thinking, but it's also the basis for the government that runs the country that you live in. So, if you're wondering why it matters, that's why. Oh boy, tired, man. Okay, so back to the top. How did the Enlightenment change England? You gotta write me at least 3 solid, detailed sentences explaining this, your answer to this question using what you found out in the video. Yeah, I hope you weren't too bored. Haha. I'll talk to you soon. All right.